Delaware. I was also a lead integration engineer before I started Salesforce. But like I mentioned, I am currently a stay at home mom, or I'm transitioning into being a stay at home mom. So my interests are God, family. I like artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Um, but the goal of this whole talk is for you guys to gain awareness, to strategize, and then go back to your companies and implement. So, again, gain awareness, strategize, and implement. This talk is not a demonstration, it's more of an architectural big picture kind of talk. And I really want you guys to contribute. So instead of me presenting like an expert, which cybersecurity is not my field, I want you guys to be able to contribute as well. So I will ask questions, I will ask for feedback, and we can go from there. It's a small group, so I don't know if everyone could join through the camera with this tool, but um, if everyone could join, that would be great. If not, you can just put your comments in the chat. Does that work?
Yeah, sure. Whoever want to speak or turn their video on, I can put them on the presenter mode so they can actually show up and have the conversation.
Okay. Sounds good. Now, if you heard the first talk, well, I'll just keep going. I'll keep going, then I'll say that. All right. So, CyberNews, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's a YouTube channel called CyberNews. And this YouTube channel is kind of funny because there's an AI newscaster, a deepfake, that is reporting the cyber news. But here are thumbnails from that YouTube channel. And you can see these are actual breaches, insecurity, or hacks, just different things that have been done to some pretty reputable companies. And some of these companies have our data, right? And so looking at these thumbnails, you can see that this is affecting everyone, and it's affecting even people or companies that are supposed to keep us secure. So the impact of a hack or a security breach or whatever we want to call it is that it can damage the company's reputation. It can affect your customers' identities, employees' identities. It can cause a loss of revenue, and it can impact layoffs, which is on everybody's mind at this point of time. So, according to MuleSoft's top 5 API security best practices white paper, it's mentioned that enterprises have over 500 APIs. So I just want to know, how many APIs do you believe your enterprise have? And this is not just MuleSoft APIs. These are just APIs in general. So they can be Python, they could be Java, they could be MuleSoft. There's 500 and above APIs. So I'm looking in the chat just to see, how many do you believe your enterprise has? Okay, 150, 300 plus, 15. Ooh, okay, interesting. 15. All right. So then there's types of APIs, right? So on this list, I don't know if you can see this, but there's REST APIs, there's webhooks, there's GraphQL, there's gRPC. There's so many types. And then for each one, there are specifications. You could go with Open API. You could go with RAML, the GraphQL specification. If you're using SOAP, WSDL. There's so many different specifications to define our APIs. Now, these two images are according to Postman's State of APIs 2022 report. So why is API security important? I want to hear from you guys. Why is it important?
Hello. Hello. Hello.
How long have I been on mute?
Hey Whitney. So, first of all, can you please make the slide on full screen, please?
Okay, hold on. Let's see. Is this better?
Um, yes, this is much better. Thank you so much, Whitney. So yeah, we have the answer from Leonardo that no exposure of sensitive data. We all know that API security is very important. Otherwise, APIs and the web services, if the APIs are not secured, then it can be the data can be exposed and the sensitivity of data and the data will be compromised. So that is a big risk to the organization, and that's why the API security is so important. uh,
Right.
yeah, Whitney.
Okay, so what's the last thing you heard?
The last thing I heard is you questioned everyone that why the API security is important. And
Okay,
we
and then
have
I
the
went on
answer
mute.
from the audience, from Minesh, from Leonardo, that to protect the data and systems, and from Leonardo that no exposure or sensitive data.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Okay, so exactly. And I have these building blocks. We've seen this over and over again. Is because APIs are the building blocks of modern architecture. So, and that makes APIs a target. So, security is a mindset. And what does that mean? It's not just a responsibility of your chief information security officer or your security teams, but it's ideally the responsibility of the entire team. So, that's everybody in the team. So, it might start with your security organization setting the standards, but then the entire team has to go and implement those standards. So, are you guys familiar with the CIA triad? This is a model that's commonly brought up in security. I'll just be brief with this, but it's pretty much there are three pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so you should make sure that your APIs are confidential. That is, you're securing your information. Unwanted parties cannot see it. Um, Integrity means that your data was not tampered with, and availability means that your systems, or in this case, your APIs, are available 24/7, or at least available when you say that they should be. So when you're designing your APIs and your APIs are made available, you need to make sure that these three things are taken care of. And you need to design your APIs in a way to make sure. So then there's the OWASP Top 10 Foundation. And this foundation is pretty much an organization of people all over the world that are focused on security. And they put out things like tools and resources, community networking, and education and training. They have these projects called OWASP Top 10 and then something. So they'll have a database project, they have a web application project, and they have an API security project. And so in 2019, they came up with, well, I'm sure before that, but I noticed in 2019, they had the top 10 list. When I first did this talk, 2019 was out, but they also came up with release candidates for 2023. Today I checked and those release candidates were no longer release candidates. So here are the top 10 API security vulnerabilities and risks. So there are broken object level authorization, broken authentication, broken object property level authorization, unrestricted resource consumption, broken function level authorization, unrestricted access to sensitive business flows, server side request forgery, security misconfiguration, improper assets management, and unsafe consumption of APIs. So, what this list means, does anyone know exactly what this list means? Have they seen this list? You may have seen something like this with API governance, MuleSoft's offering. Okay, so I'll keep going. So this list are top 10 vulnerabilities. Okay, Leonardo has seen it. Okay. So there are top 10 vulnerabilities and risk. And these happen globally. And this foundation has put together these top 10. And based on the top 10, you can put in your API security strategy and design, you can design and implement your APIs to mitigate the risk of these vulnerabilities. Okay? Does that make sense? So when you see this list, you should be able to design your APIs to make sure that you address possible vulnerabilities and risks. Has anyone used this list in their organizations? Yes, Leonardo. Okay. No, that was a minute ago. All right. So it's good to know, and that's the point of this conversation, is just to have some awareness of this list. Now, when I first did this for the 2019 list, it was in Omaha, but now we're going to do this in 2023. So to really get the most out of this meetup, I think what we need to do is, okay, yes, a few of them, Siva. What we need to do is we need to talk about it, and audience participation. So I see a few people have come on, which is great. So we'll go through about 3 or 4 of these vulnerabilities and we'll just talk about them. And then we'll talk about how, from a MuleSoft perspective, we can make sure that we implement or mitigate some of these risks. Okay. So, next slide. So, how can we mitigate these risks? Of course, architects and developers, we have to understand Anypoint platform components and how we can use them to impact security or secure our APIs. Before I joined MuleSoft, I was an integration engineer. And one of the companies that I worked for, I was a small company. I was a part of a small company. And that company asked me to help them plan for their licensing, right? So it was a whole analysis process went in. And one of the things we had to do was look at our MuleSoft Anypoint platform subscription and what was given to us and what was not. And then we had to determine like how would we use it. A lot of times I've seen as being a customer of MuleSoft as well as being a partner of MuleSoft, where I later joined a partner organization to MuleSoft, is that some organizations buy the product, they buy the subscription, but they're not fully utilizing the platform. And so we're going to look at these products and how we can utilize them. So let's start with broken object level authorization. So I am going to read to you the possible attack, the recommendation that was given by this OWASP Foundation, and then we'll talk about it and how we can secure our APIs using some of the tools that MuleSoft has given us. There's no right or wrong answer, and this can go as long as you guys want to go. All right. So the first one is broken object level authorization. This was a risk that was in 2019, and it's basically just exploitation of vulnerable API endpoints by manipulation of the IDs. So here's an attack. So an e-commerce platform for online stores provides a listing page with a revenue of charts for their hosted shops. Now, inspecting the browsing request, an attacker can identify these API endpoints. Now, when we inspect browser requests, I want you to think about this like your Chrome tools, your Chrome developer tools. You go in, you open your Chrome developer tools, and you start hitting some buttons in your browser because your browser is your API client at that point, and you're able to inspect the requests. Well, an attacker can do the same thing. So in this particular scenario, this attacker is able to identify these API endpoints used as a data source for those charts and their patterns. Using another API endpoint, the attacker can get the list of all the hosted shop names. Okay, so not only does it have the revenue data, now it has the list of the shop names. Now, with a simple script, let's say this script was written using Java or Python, a simple script, they can manipulate the names in that list. They can replace that shop name in the URL, and the attacker can gain access to the sales data of thousands of e commerce stores. So, again, let's say we had something where we had shops and then the name of the shop, right? We have something like this. We have an endpoint like that. Attackers have been able to manipulate these endpoints and gain access. Now, manipulating these endpoints, again, this is broken object level authorization. So, what is the recommendation? Yes, I know a few of them. I know where you're going. Haha, I had to compromise on a few. Sorry, I'm looking at Siva's comment. Great. So Siva, I'm looking for you to stop me. So how can we do this, right? So OWASP is actually recommending that you have proper authorization mechanisms that rely on user policies and hierarchy. You use these authorization mechanisms to check the logged in access to perform the requested action on record on the record in every function. Also, we want to reduce predictability. So you want to use random GUIDs for your record IDs. So you don't want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if you have an ID, let's say you have an ID of a customer ID, you don't want to give Whitney 1, Sonali 2, Siva 3, because then that's very predictable and the attacker can easily guess. So you'll see a common theme in security is that random and unpredictability is good. You're going to write tests to evaluate your authorization, and you're not going to deploy vulnerable changes that break your tests. Okay, so here's where I need everybody's participation. So I have a couple of thoughts here, but you guys, I want to see your thoughts as well. So here's some thoughts. Um, for this, you're going to work with a cross-functional. Your strategy is to work with a cross-functional team and to configure your authorization mechanism. So if you're working with your DevOps team, your admins, everybody's at hand. Everybody understands the endpoints and everything else. And as far as the components, you'll address authorization using things like OAuth 2.0 and tokens, designed securely using RAML security schemes. You can enforce secure design using some of those API governance profiles and rule sets. Apply API gateway policies, and then you can also beef up your CI/CD pipelines. Anyone else have any ideas on what we can do as far as addressing this? So again, we have manipulative we're manipulating our IDs. So there's some broken level authorization.
Whitney, one. Uh, this is Siva here. I would like to add something.
Yeah.
Uh, so uh, the depends upon see when it comes to the broken object level authorization. So that's more. Let's say if uh, I know it is mostly applicable to the APIs, but these days, the batch process are also being triggered uh, by keeping APIs as a handler. In that scenario, what is your thought process on that?
Hold on. What'd you say
So
again?
the batch process. So mostly these security concerns are mostly confined to the APIs, right?
Hmm.
So apart from the API-led architecture, so there is a ETL transactions also being part of
Yeah.
the development, and some customers they are asking to have a handler for that batch process in case if the batch process doesn't work or got
Yeah.
stuck in between. So
Yeah.
in that scenario, how we can achieve the do you think a basic security would be ideal thing, or do you want to go with all these patterns?
I mean, okay, so I'm trying to make sure I understand you. So you're saying, let's say we used an API to trigger a batch process. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I mean, you're going to have to decide how much security is necessary, right?
Yep.
So it may be that this is just internal and you don't need to do all of that. You're behind a firewall or whatever. But you'll have to determine with the team how much is necessary. Who also gets access to certain things. How should you go use a token and things like that. It really depends on the customer, the client. Um, but I would say, securing it doesn't hurt to secure things, right?
Yep.
As much as possible. I know I've done this use case at a client and we did not go through, let me see. I think we did use a JWT token. We did that, but I mean, it probably wasn't the most secure as it could be, but um the company, your client, as well as you guys have to all strategize and say how much security do I need, because sometimes security can slow things down. And so, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's you guys are all getting together, looking at it, saying this is the risk, and there's
Yep.
a trade-off, right? Just like when we talk about architecture, there's a trade-off of time and space and things like that. So again, here there's no right or wrong answers for it. But, is it internal or is it external, right? Is it, if it's external, you probably want, at least to have OAuth tokens or something back there, but you have to determine that.
That's right. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Um, any other questions? I saw. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correct. Simindra. I don't know. You guys have to help me. But security policy enforcement. Okay. Yeah, we can do that. All right, I'll move on. So broken authentication. Now the 2019, it was called broken user authentication. So some things have changed, but some things haven't. Now this is just exploitation of our authentication mechanisms. And this is providing attackers control. So does anybody know the difference between authorization and authentication? And or are they the same?
Now, the authentication is more of it's self identity. Okay. Well, the authorization is, are you authorized to use this particular service? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So just because I can authenticate doesn't mean that I'm authorized to see certain things. So let's say we have API and maybe we have, I gotta think about it. Okay, maybe we have the shop list, right? So we're a customer, and maybe the customer doesn't get access to inventory details, like of everything, like store locations, inventory details, or just they just don't get full access to everything. So that's authorization. But authentication is, like you said, this is my identity. I can authenticate in, I can gain access to the system, but I may not have authorization on the entire system. I may not have authorization for every endpoint, which, of course, so that's the difference. So authentication has to do with your credentials. So here's a attack scenario that I found interesting when I first learned it. It's called credential stuffing. And this attack scenario, I believe, happens all the time in big data breaches. So this is how it works. Anyone heard of credential stuffing? All right, I'll tell you. Okay, so credential stuffing occurs when there is a data breach. And notice in this picture, there's a bunch of username, password combinations. So we have these username, password combinations, and the person or the organization that attacked and breached one of these popular companies, they've gone and sold that information on the black market, right? They went to cyber forums or hacker forums and they sold this information somewhere. Okay. So now someone goes and buys it, or it could be the same attack organization or attacker. Someone goes and buys this information and they run a script, maybe a Python script, and they're just trying out, they're brute forcing different apps with different login credentials. So you can see we have three different apps, right? We have a storage app, an email app, and a social media app. But notice the password combinations are the same, right? So you have admin, and then some passwords, SpongeBob and password one, Squidward and Acme. I mean, somebody likes SpongeBob here. Sally loves Texas, right? And you can see that this this username password pairs, these pairs that were in the Acme database breach, were now there's some matches. So the green represent the matches. You can see that SpongeBob password one worked in storage app, um, and then it also worked in email. And then you can see that Sally Loves Texas worked in the email, but it didn't work in the other ones. So this is called credential stuffing. I stole your credentials and now I'm hitting and I'm checking and I'm seeing which ones I got access to. So it happens all the time. So more of the story is try to have different username password pairs. I know this is difficult at times, but try your best to have that, because you don't want the same username password pair that you have with Facebook in your banking app. So if somebody breaches Facebook, God forbid, you don't want them to have access to your banking information. So try to do that. Now, here are some recommendations for here. So make sure you know all your possible flows to authenticate to the API. So you have your mobile, your web, your deep links that implement this one-click authentication. Ask your engineers what flows you missed. So when you're kind of taking wow, you're trying to take an inventory of everything, and you're going back and you're asking engineers, is this something that I missed? This is the flow, this is the workflow to get our authentication set up. You're going to read about your authentication mechanisms. You understand that OAuth is not authentication, but is authorization, hence OAuth. Okay, well, authentication is still the same, but okay, anyway, it's authorization. And API keys are not necessarily authentication as well. But here's a really important one that I think is worth mentioning, is that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use authentication processes that are already out there. So authentication, I can't speak, generation, um, password storage, and we're going to use standards. Now, where can we go and get all of these standards? Do you guys know where you can go? Okay. OWASP cheat sheet. And I'm going to put the link here. Um, I'm going to put the link here since we're talking about it. Can you still see my screen? I think so. All right. So here, I'm going to put the link here for you guys. Make sure you keep it. And this is where you can get all your information for everything I just spoke about, right, in this presentation. But when you scroll down, you'll see how to prevent, and you'll also see a cheat sheet, right? So if, let's say, you just don't have the knowledge of it, you can go and use that resource and get the cheat sheet, and they will explain everything that I am mentioning. Now I have to find my presentation. Let's see. Okay. Any questions?
Uh, so Brittany, let me ask you a question here. So, what I so as we all know, we regularly on our day-to-day basis, we apply the security that is uh, as per the MuleSoft best standards and practices, right? So, as we discussed earlier, we define the security schemes in RAML, we define the API policies, we enforce the policies, we apply the client id enforcement. So
Mm-hmm.
now, apart from our regular practices, and also uh, so that's so apart from our regular practices, we like we apply the basic authentication or the OAuth 2.0, the latest one, right? So we suppose we have implemented all the latest standards, security standards mentioned by MuleSoft,
Right.
but what are the additional standards that we should apply
Right.
as per the OWASP recommendations, and how we can in the MuleSoft Anypoint platform or in the implementation we can apply that additional security so our APIs are so secured and data won't be compromised.
Right. Okay. So the first thing I would say is that you're right. You're doing everything that you're following MuleSoft best practices. That's great, right? But at the same time, just make sure that you keep an eye on what's going on in cyber news, right? Different attacks, and when there's a release of or there's knowledge of how to prevent and mitigate new risk, then you go and you implement that. So if you're doing everything that MuleSoft's telling you and it's working and there's no risk, still be vigilant, talk to your security teams and say, hey, I saw this was impacted. How does that affect us? Would be my answers. Just stay vigilant. You know what I mean? Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely definitely it helps. We have to work with the security team, ask them to check it out, test the APIs, and then we can definitely working with the security team we can apply more securities to the APIs if it's needed,
Right.
but we can make sure that the APIs are secured.
Right. And I think so here's some other recommendations they're saying, right? So you need to prepare for brute force attacks, right? Using the cheat sheet that I showed you, enabling multi-factor authentication, putting things so pretty much when you're thinking about authentication, I showed you credential stuffing, right? And how that works. Well, how would you stop a credential stuffing attack, right? How would you do that? If you look at some of these things based off of what you know about MuleSoft, how would you stop something that's brute force? Somebody's just sending you brute force information. Does anybody know? Exactly, exactly. Rate limiting. Exactly. So these are some of the things you can look at these OWASP guidelines and you can say, and you can look at the MuleSoft guidelines and you can say, okay, all right, we got that because OWASP was saying these are the risks, but I'm able to use this thing like rate limiting policy to overcome this. So that's the whole point is that we know what the risks are for 2023 and then we're going back into our MuleSoft toolbox and we're looking at it. Okay? So here's some things here's some things that I kind of came up with. um Enabling HTTPS, however you want to enable it, applying your rate limiting policies, whether you're using the Mule Classic API gateway or the Flex gateway, rate limiting and rate limiting with SLA policies. This helps you with brute force attacks. Of course, you're going to have to determine what your rate limit would be, and it has to be, you have to make sure that it's adjusted properly. But then this is a thing that you're kind of thinking about already with your teams. I've never done this, but implementing OAuth 2.0 and Pixie, this was recommended by Audrey Honeycutt. And then adding high availability to your architecture, right? And do anybody know why we want to add some high availability in there? If we're thinking about that that CIA triad, and you can put it in the comments. You don't have to get on. All right, so I'll just tell you, we want to make sure that we have availability, right? So if someone takes down one API, the other one is still there. We don't lose anything. Or they take down a system, we don't lose anything. We have something already there. So, for instance, can you imagine if a financial industry blacked out, or one of our finance APIs that we use doesn't work? I mean, it happens, but imagine how that impacts business. Or something like healthcare, and healthcare API is no longer working. Then we have to make sure that we build in availability into our API security. Now, we have clients that sometimes they say, hey, um, we can't make things as available as possible. We can't build in high availability like we want to. We can only go with like 2 servers, or maybe we can only do one. You really want to make sure that you talk to them about making things, um duplicating some of the things, and having it so that if one thing goes down, something else comes up. um okay, so the next one, security misconfiguration. We're running out of time, so I want to know, how am I doing in this presentation, and do you want to stay a little longer?
Yes, sure, Brittany. You can please proceed.
Okay, so the next one's security misconfiguration, and this is basically attackers. They often attempt to find unpatched flaws, common endpoints, unprotected files and directories, and to gain unauthorized access. So they're looking for these flaws. Somewhere we maybe misconfigured a server, something has happened. So here's an attack scenario. Basically, you have this back end, this an API of a backend server is going to maintain an access log that's written in a popular third-party open source logging utility, with support for a placeholder expansion of your JNDI lookups. And they're both enabled by default. For each request, a new entry is written in a log file with the following pattern. Okay, so now we have this bad actor or this attacker. They're going to issue the following request, which gets written to the access log. So you can see here, get health. They're doing a health check, and they issue this request. So, due to insecure default configuration of the logging utility and a permissive network outbound policy, in order to write this corresponding entry to the access log while expanding the value of your header X API version request, the logging utility is going to pull and execute the malicious class object from the attacker's remote controlled server. So they again, there was some kind of security misconfiguration. So this is a scenario. But us in MuleSoft, we witnessed a scenario similar to this with Log4j. Does everybody remember that one? Yeah. So when I think of this, I think of Log4j. Now, maybe Log4j was not due to the actual vulnerability, and that was not a security misconfiguration. But if you were on hybrid or PCE at that time, your the customer success team was reaching out to you, or partners teams was reaching out to you and saying, hey, patch that server. There's a log4j vulnerability, patch that server. So imagine if you never patched your server, how you could have a vulnerability. So again, your attacker is looking, hey, maybe this is not, there's a vulnerability here. Let me try that out. It's all about trying things out. Well, I got this strategy. I'm going to try that. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let me try this. Oh, that didn't work. Just things like that. So here's the recommendations. Your API lifecycle should have repeatable hardening process leading to fast and easy deployments in a lockdown environment. So you're hardening this process. There's a task to review and update your configurations across your entire stack. So somebody's literally going and making sure these configurations are secure communication channel across all API interactions, access to static assets. So you're going in and you're just looking at these things. The automated process to continuously assess the effectiveness of the configuration and setting in all the environments. So basically, what you're going to do is make sure you're going to dot your I's and cross your T's. You're going to make sure that things are configured properly. So there's some other things here that you can do. I'll allow you guys to check the website yourself to figure that out. But if you were looking at this, what are some things that you think that you could possibly implement? So one, just to go through some of the list here, there's the CORS policy. We have that. Checking your unpatched files. Here's another one. They recommended API enforcing API payload response schemas. Do you guys know how what you can do with that? How to do that? Well, there's actually a validator. There's a schema validator that you can use, and you can build it in Mule4. But yeah. So this is the last one. Now, I didn't go over all of them, but I tried to go over some. And this is unsafe consumptions of APIs. So here, the attacker being able to exploit this issue requires the attacker to identify and potentially compromise your APIs. And it's pretty much because you're using a third-party API, you're consuming this API, and you, when I say you, the developer, pretty much trusts this third-party service, right? We say, oh, we're using this popular company X API, so it must be secure. But that's not necessarily the facts. So this scenario, an API relies on a third-party service to enrich the user-provided business addresses. When the address is supplied to the API by the end user, it's sent to a third-party service and is returned, and then is stored in a local SQL-enabled database. Bad actors, again, they use this third-party service to store their SQL payload associated with a business created by them. Then they go after the vulnerability API, providing the vulnerable API providing the specific endpoint. So basically here, if we think that we're relying on our third-party API to be secure, we can't. So here are the recommendations here. Basically evaluating your service provider and assessing their API security posture. How secure are they, right? So before we're interacting with a third-party API, how secure is it? Assessing it. Sometimes when you have to integrate with other companies' APIs, sometimes you can negotiate. Maybe you can ensure that they use TLS, right? Or they implement secure HTTPS. Maybe they might say, well, we don't do it, but maybe you could be the person that says, hey, we would like you to do it. Sometimes you can convince a third party APIs that you're interacting with, especially if they're providing a service around a project for you. Maybe they can improve their API or their security. You're going to always validate and you're going to sanitize data received from the integrated APIs before using it, and you're going to maintain an allow list. Now, are there any things that we can do in MuleSoft for this? Okay, so here's one. This slide is messed up. Okay, but pretty much watch the CyberNews, understand the security strategy. Also, there's an IP allow list policy, right? And maybe you can enable two-way authentication. Any questions? All right, so lastly, here's some best practices that I worked with Audrey Honeycutt to come up with that you can do if you're MuleSoft developers, or if you're architects that are helping MuleSoft developers, you can help them out. So using environment variables in your API clients, like your Postman, your advanced REST client, whichever you want to use. Encrypt all your credentials. You guys know that. Using your MuleSoft secure properties. You can also encrypt your client ID. So you can encrypt your password, but you can encrypt your client ID as well. Making sure you don't check in your credentials unless they're encrypted, and don't check in your vault key. Your vault key should not be a local property, but it should be a command line property. And you don't want to use one client ID, client secret for all your APIs. You guys have multiple APIs, multiple environments, and don't use, and Audrey was really serious about this, don't use real data in DataWeave Playground. If you want to use real data, use a VS Code extension for DataWeave. So do you have any secure recommendations? Okay, well, here's some resources. I think it's always important to look at resources. So there's the OWASP Foundation. There's the top 5 API security best practices white paper. Also, there's Overflow. I think this is Stack Overflow blog, best practices for REST APIs. Always MuleSoft documentation. And then there's the Postman State of the API, which is not here, State of the API report that comes out where you can keep up in the know. Okay, there was a question. Is allow list whitelisting recommended for external APIs as well? I wouldn't see why not, right? I mean, I think it depends. I mean, you can blacklist, you can allow list, but I wouldn't see why you wouldn't have an allow list for external APIs. Does anyone know why you wouldn't?
Yeah, hi, Whitney. This is Shalini. So, I mean, in certain scenarios, you would have clients calling from, I mean, using the API from any other system, right? So, IP whitelist may not always be a recommended way to do it, is what I was thinking when I asked this.
Right, right. So if you don't use an IP allow list, would it be what else would you use? Is
Yeah,
it a different?
no, I didn't know that. That's why I wanted to know what was the other way to do it, if not IP
Right.
whitelisting.
So I'm going to give you a I'm this is what I would really recommend, right? So I'm not a security expert. I know you guys want me to be, but I'm not. I'm an integration expert.
Yeah.
Well, was. I'll say was. But what I would really encourage everyone here to do is to just go and look at this link that I put
Mhm.
22 minutes ago in the chat. I'll put it again. Look it up. Look at the security top 10. Make sure you understand it. If you don't understand, it's okay. But as you're looking through it, this is the goal, right? It's going to explain each one, object level authorization, who are the threats, what's the weakness, how it impacts you, is how you can determine if your API is vulnerable, right? Attack scenarios, which I went through, and then how to prevent them. And then there'll be a cheat sheet for each one, right? With even more information that I showed you. So if an allow list can't work, then you can go and say, okay, allow list doesn't work. What else can I use? Because it's all about what your organization has and how you can mitigate certain risks. So maybe you can't use the allow list, but you have to use something else. So we were on unsafe consumption of APIs, how to prevent. Okay. Always validate and sanitize, maintain and allow list of well-known locations. Integrated APIs may redirect yours too. Do not blindly follow redirects. Okay. Don't blindly follow them. But anyway, you can go in here and you can get the cheat sheet, right? So
Yeah.
of this. So maybe your issue is, you know, this part or whatever. And you can look and see. And on top of that, this site is really good because you can see externally where they got this information, right? So improper input validation, exposure to sensitive information, clear text transmission. So I really, if you didn't get anything out of this talk, my goal is you have some exposure to these top 10.
Mhm.
You take this back, you think about it, and when you implement your next project or you're maintaining APIs, you think about how you can secure these APIs, how you can maintain them a little bit better. You're also going and you're looking for cybersecurity news, um, and those types of things so that you and the rest of your team can address this. That's the end. Any other questions? I hope this was okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So, what's a takeaway that anyone else has want to share?
Yeah, so as per the Flex Gateway documentation, if the whatever the common policies defined for the APIs, the security policies that applies to all the APIs in the Flex Gateway. So if you are using the Flex Gateway, it should be uh, applied to external APIs as well. So, but uh, I'm not 100% sure, so you can definitely check it out. This is the documentation for the Flex Gateway.
Yes. The other thing I want to say is there's the API governance, which has I believe it's called a rule set. It's a rule set of OWASP top 10. I'm not sure if it's updated with the 2023, but basically, um, it'll enforce in your design. I believe it's design. It'll enforce secure design. So you just go in, you add these rule sets to types of profiles, and then as you're designing your APIs, it will say, well, you must implement this or make sure you have this security scheme. So I would definitely take a look at it. I'm not sure. I think it's available for everyone. I don't know if I've misspoken, but um let's see. Let me type. So, going in, like Sonali said, for the Flex Gateway, you know your policies that you can use. You're looking through this list, and then you see some additional things that MuleSoft is offering. So I think here, let's see. Yeah, so you can see Open API best practices. Okay, that's the wrong one, but OWASP API top security. So you can see here, if you're really, really concerned, you can just be in the know. Just know, hey, MuleSoft has these things here, and you just implement it in your next project. That's it. I do want to apologize for going over time, and I do want to say thank you to everyone. This is my last meetup. I'm going to be behind the scenes for a while.
Thank you so much, Whitney. It's a great presentation, and it's a lot of additional information provided on API securities. So that's really important in our day-to-day implementation. So I'm really thankful to all the audience as well for staying with us for 1 hour and having the great conversation on API securities and OAups and what's the recommendations and the best practices we can implement along with the MuleSoft standard practices for the API security. Well, anybody has any questions? If any further questions on the API security, you can definitely put in the forums, and we can answer your questions in the MuleSoft forums, as well as you can read the documentation on the API governance on MuleSoft documentation. And please reach out to us if you have any questions. To answer you. Thank you so much, all. Thank you. Thanks, the audience. And thank you so much, Whitney, for a wonderful topic and uh, really spending time. And thank you so much for spending some time with us, sharing your knowledge. And it's always good to have you in the meetup. So
Thank you.
we are so grateful. Thank
Thank
you,
you very
Whitney.
much.
Yep.
All right, you
Thank you.
guys take care.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, everyone.